when you meet somebody who's at their deathbed, most of the time it's about what they didn't do, right? It's the regret that they talk about the most, right? And so when I experienced this thing in London, I said, I don't want to ever have regret again, like especially for big things. I want to just do it. And I'm lucky enough that I've had amazing experiences in my life, right? I've had great degrees. I'm lucky, I mean, I came out of India, came to this country when I was 18 with 2 suitcases, $1,000 in my pocket, and I've been able to do it, right? And so a big part of that is luck, a big part of that is hard work, but I think a lot of that is also just got to do with you taking the chances on things that you love doing and just going for it. And so I figured, hey, let's just keep doing that. It's going to work out fine.
Guys, here we go. Another trip around the Yogi Triathlete podcast. I'm Jess, your host, endurance athlete, mindset coach, and someone who's in a deep soul contract with her co-host, Coach BJ. We are on a mission to create a better world, and a critical piece of that mission is to share meaningful conversations with the endurance sports world via this podcast. We see you guys, we see your support, and we are grateful that you are not only tuning in, but attuning yourselves to higher levels of living. Thank you to all our Patreon supporters, especially Abby and Renee, who just signed on as patrons. There is so much amazing content in that community, including recipes, extras, and mini interviews. Most recently, Beej and I have been streaming yoga classes through Zoom, and patrons are flowing with us for free. So get over to patreon.com/yogi triathlete and know that you have our eternal gratitude. We are all on the same path, and it's incredibly helpful to be reminded that we are never alone. When we trust the flow of life and stop pushing against it, we will see that it unfolds perfectly. I'm reading Diane Collins's book, Do You Quantum Think? And in it, she says that the perfection is why it all fits together. The perfect is it fitting all together. This recipe she describes has nothing to do with it being clean. It can surely be, and most often is, messy. But whatever it is, Beej and I believe that it's the perfection of the path that puts it all together. Arshad Bahl had no plans of creating a plant-based nutrition product, not to mention a brand that continues to expand and remains one of the longest in the game. When he and his wife welcomed their son, Ayan, into the world in 2004, they didn't realize at the time that he would be the one to inspire the creation that we now know as Amrita Foods. A brand whose mission it is to create better for you plant-based snacks that nourish the body and soul. We've known Arshad since 2016 when BJ took a job with Amrita after leaving his corporate job. And whether our guest today knows it or not, he served as an amazing catalyst for BJ in his transition and in his growth. We are so grateful to you, Arshad. We are so grateful to have you on the show with us today. It's the perfect time, and I know this entire conversation will just fit together perfectly as we move from a place of presence. So welcome, my friend. This has been a long time coming.
Thank you.
We're so glad to have you here, and we are finding you this afternoon in your brand new space, which you moved into kind of right before this all happened in our life, right? March of 2020?
Yeah, it was right around, it was a couple weeks before the lockdown happened. It was just perfect timing.
And so some people would say, oh my gosh, you just expanded the space and moved into this, expansion, and then this all hit. That's got to be terrible. But what you just told us before we hit record was that the timing couldn't be better.
Yeah, and I think one of these things that I've realized in life is that the best plans are typically, written well in paper, but the execution of it is flowing. It's keeps changing constantly, and so having a space here, to me, it's kind of like an artist space. Like it's a canvas, and I've got some fixed things here that I need to do, but there's also a lot of openness to it, and I've purposely designed it that way so I can deal with uncertainties and deal with changing situations. Definitely COVID has been a major impact, but as an essential company, we've been allowed to continue working, which has been really, just from a mental perspective has been good. So I can keep working on my craft. But at the same time, like I was telling you, the supply chain and other places have been broken. So I had to constantly adjust to what I wanted to do or how I wanted to execute. And it takes a little bit of trial and error and frustration some days, but you know, we just sit down and we chalk every day as the best we can do. And that's how we're learning here.
And I know even back in 2016, I'm sure it went back even further, that you wanted to open up a facility, or you wanted a space that had, it was gluten-free and nut-free and vegan, and now it's here. This is it.
So I did corporate for many years. And before that, I was lucky enough to be a consultant. So I've had varied careers in my past. And when I embarked on doing Amrita in 2012, I wanted to have this blend between being an entrepreneur, but also doing something that's giving back to society. And the third part was doing something that is meaningful to me, like makes me feel like I'm providing value and service to the society. One of the ways I think I realized that I could provide the best value was to be a maker. And I think for the longest time in my life, I've been, on the other side where I've been doing strategy and consulting and telling people what to do. And, I've got my my degrees and all that. And I always walked in and I said, oh, yeah, I think based on data, you should do this. But I always felt like what I lacked was execution. And so this endeavor here is about getting my hands dirty, executing, getting coming out of this experience every single day, being really tired, physically tired, and I love that feeling. And there's lots of things that I didn't get when I was in consulting or when I was working, for a big company sitting behind a desk. And it's a really, really good feeling for me to not only design the product, but actually physically be involved in making the product.
So take us back and starting, because I know this was inspired by assisting your son, you and your wife assisting your son in healing from some pretty big suffering, gastrointestinal suffering. So take us way back and tell us the story, because I know he received a diagnosis when he was 2 years old that really changed everything.
Yeah, so when he was 2 years old, we knew that there was something wrong. He didn't have speech. He had severe gastrointestinal problems, just a lot of occupational therapy issues that he was exhibiting. We did not know what the word autism was, but we went to a pediatrician who diagnosed him right away as a kid on the spectrum. But luckily, this pediatrician also was a GI specialist and was able to sort of connect the dots and say that at that time, the statistics were about 80% of boys on the autism spectrum also had GI problems. And if you help solve the GI issues, then it relieves the body from some pressure and allows the body to heal and absorb more things like speech therapy and occupational therapy and social behavior. So he gave us the prescription basically to get on a low inflammation diet. And at that time, allergen-friendly diets wasn't really a word, like gluten-free wasn't even a well-known term. And so we basically just went and looked up what the common inflammation items were. And, it's a typical gluten, dairy, animal products, soy, excessively processed foods. And essentially, it was a plant-based, mostly raw diet that he was on. Very, very difficult for him. And but that process, and it took a while, 6 months to a year of being on that process, really healed his gut. And what we were really surprised was as his gut was healing, stuff started working. Like he started absorbing the speech therapy a lot faster, words started coming out, just a lot of other things. He started sleeping better. And so this was like a domino effect that happened when his gut healed. And so we started that, and that took about a year and a half for his gut to fully heal. But he went through about 4 years of different therapies very aggressively, close to 30 hours a week. He was in different programs, even attending school at the age of 3 years old, special needs schools. But I think by the time he was 8, he had started developing more mainstream characteristics, like, was able to talk to his peers, was able to, sit down. Also, a lot of the kids on the spectrum have ADD, ADHD tendencies, so have a very hard time concentrating. So he had ability to sit down and concentrate and take in. And I think by the time he was 9, he was very close to being neurotypical. And then we were asked when he was 10 whether we'd be comfortable with changing his diagnosis to without an IEP, essentially. And we did that because we wanted the services to go to another child who needed it, because services are pretty tight in terms of what's available. And now he's 15, neurotypical kid. Probably most people can't tell the difference. And that process taught me a lot about the value of, or the relationship of food to healing. And that's what sort of led to the genesis of Amrita in 2012.
Were you all plant-based? Where did plant-based come into this, or have you always been plant-based?
So I've been plant-based for 20 years, but my son was plant-based. See, the thing is that kids on the spectrum tend to be very, very repetitive in their behavior and what they like, and so you have to be cautious when you're trying to get them off certain products, onto cleaner products. And so he, like probably most kids, were on what's called a brown diet, which is typically nuggets, fries, and things like that. And so we had to get him off that onto plant-based versions of it. But this is in 2008, 9. The versions of plant-based nuggets was really terrible. So he still had a little bit of meat in his diet. It was still gluten-free. But then as the better options came up, and as we started making versions with tofu or versions with tempeh, we'd move him towards it. What we found made the biggest difference was getting him off dairy. Dairy was just clog him up really bad, especially his GI, and gluten were the two big problems. And then getting him off any processed grains, like any of the stuff that, the fast food stuff was really, really bad for him. So we were cooking a ton of vegetables, a ton of fruits. He was on a very high fruit diet through this process. And I think that really helped him because it gave him just a lot of fiber. It was delicious. It was just really high in vitamins and antioxidants. And I think that just gives him a lot of that good nutrition that he's needing to, at that time. And so vegetables was tough for a while with him. But we were able to work that through, other parts in his meal.
It's reminding me of kind of the recipe that BJ and I say is like the recipe for success. And we can apply this to anything that we really want to achieve, is a little bit every day or a long period of time, that we really need to be patient with the process. And when I think about your little boy, like how much discomfort he must have been in. And when you're in discomfort or pain, which so many people are in pain, you're not absorbing the teachings of the speech therapist, because the discomfort in the body is going to be taking the most of your attention. I can imagine it would be so hard for him. And we have a very good friend who's been on the show twice, Wendy Garofalo, and her son. I know that they have some Amrita bars. The second time we had her on the podcast, it was all about changing the diet and the power of that in healing the gut to heal the brain.
Yeah. And it's, the difficult part about all of this is that it's not a magic pill, right? It takes a tremendous amount of patience. It's not every allergen or every inflammation item works the same way in every kid. And autistic kids are very routine oriented. So it's extremely difficult to get them to switch diets. So, the amount of work that parents have to do, plus the amount of work that the kids have to do too, is just tremendous. Plus, there's been a lot of discrediting of the connection between diet and autism for a while in media. And I don't know, like all the sources of it. My feeling is some of it is driven by pharma because they can't make money off nutrition or just, plants and regular food. So there's been a lot of discrediting of actual hard evidence in this space. And I think as a parent who's dealing with autism, you've just got so many different things to deal with. So then you say, oh, well, the diet doesn't work. I'll just give the child whatever they want, and I'll work on speech and OT and other things. And so I see a lot of that. And that kind of, sometimes it makes me sad because I think diet is kind of mostly free. Yeah, it's a lot of work, but what do you got to lose to try it?
If we're not feeling good, we're not going to be able to absorb anything. I mean, let alone absorb any of the nutrients that we're trying to put in the body, we're not going to want to learn. We're not going to want to pay attention.
Yep.
Yeah, it takes incredible patience. Was there a time that do you remember any particular moment where it felt like too much, where you could really see why some parents are saying, you know what, just get the speech therapist in here because that's their job and I can't do this anymore?
Yeah, for sure. So and I'll just give you one data point. Like there are more families that go through divorce over autism than I think any other condition, because the stress that it puts on a marriage and on the family is just tremendous. But put that aside, I think of the one incident that was just always stays in my mind is this situation where when the pediatrician diagnosed him, he said, listen, we need a view of how bad his GI is. So they gave him what's called a pill cam. It's a tiny pill that actually has a bunch of cameras in it, and you put it in, and he swallows it, and it travels through his entire gut, and it takes pictures every second. Okay, but the thing is that he can't eat for, I think it's 24 to 36 hours. And then he needs to go in and get, I think he was getting endoscopy or colonoscopy, something like that, to basically get a visual check of how bad the problem was. The problem is that because he wasn't eating, he also wasn't drinking any water, and he started getting a really high fever, and they can't do the endoscopy when the child has fever. So I still remember sitting in the room with the doctor. He's saying, listen, I can't do this operation. He'll have to come back. And we just started bawling because we knew how difficult it was for this kid not to eat any food, to have fever. And we basically very quickly, analyzed the situation and realized that it's just fluids that he was missing. So we put him on an IV drip. And as soon as he got some liquids into his body, his fever came down, and they were able to perform the endoscopy. But it's just a chilling moment that still I remember vividly as to how difficult it was for him, who was crying, and for my wife and myself. We were just also, just in tremendous amount of fear and just feeling like helplessness at that time.
Like he hasn't eaten, and he's already suffering, and now he's suffering more, and now you're telling me he can't do
what we came here
what
to do.
we created all this suffering for.
Right.
So what did they find? What were the findings of that test?
Yeah, so they found massive lesions throughout his entire GI system. So the pill cam showed that, and the endoscopy, and I think it was just an endoscopy from the top down, showed that his GI tract was pretty raw, and that was actually what led them to say, listen, he's a severe GI kid. He will do really well with steroids, or if you want to go, don't give him steroids at this stage because they can have pretty severe impacts, at 2 years or 3 years old. Do the inflammation, low inflammation diet process. So we walked away with a prescription for steroids, and then this advice of how to be on a low inflammation diet, and we basically followed the low inflammation diet, and we're so glad we did, because the steroids would have been the easy way out. Just to give him some of that. They didn't do a follow up because he was feeling much better, so we assumed that his GI was healed by that point. And then that, like I said, it took about a whole year by the time we went back for the follow-up.
What did you guys? Was there a discussion that went on when you've got the pill, you got the prescription in one hand, and you've got this low inflammation diet in the other hand, and you're sitting there maybe with your wife and just like discussing the options and figuring out, which path do we take? We know this one is going to be more struggle, and we're going to have to learn some things, but overall it might help him. Or you've got this prescription, this pass, basically, to just sort of fast track it.
Yeah, so I was already on plant-based for a while before that, so I knew the value of food, right? So I kind of had some insight into how food heals the body, and that was basically my discussion. And the doctor didn't have enough evidence at that time to be very conclusive that a low inflammation diet was going to work. So he was saying, listen, we're still working through this. You guys will be one of our early case studies if it works. And but I would really. And he was, and we're very lucky to have had him versus another doctor who would have not given us the inflammation route or the low inflammation route, and would have just given us the steroids. And so we took the low inflammation option, and we said, again, what do we got to lose? We'll try it for a couple of months. If it doesn't work, we can always try out the steroids.
Yeah, I think that's a brave choice, because it's like you had instant relief in one hand, which I agree probably would have caused some repercussions that would have needed to be dealt with in the future. Or you take that, what we would call like the goat path, right? So you've got the super highway that you can go down,
Six
know
lanes.
that it's just going to be a smooth ride. Or you look up at that mountain and you start taking that first step, and you're bushwhacking that trail, knowing that it's going to be a bit of a journey. So how does this experience with your son translate to you leaving your job and creating Amrita?
Yeah, so this happened in 2007-ish, 2008. I took a sabbatical from IBM I went on 20 hours a week of work. So basically just working part-time, and really wanted to get myself immersed in the recovery for my son, because I really felt that one of the key pieces of data that I'd read was that early intervention was critical. Because the brains are incredibly pliable at an early age, and so the more maximum effort you put in, the response or the return on that effort is pretty good when the brain is very pliable. So I decided that it was important for me to really learn what was the process of recovery, and also just be involved in it, because I think one of the things I had heard from other parents was that the children get very confused by all these multiple teachers coming into the house. And at that age, they're already dealing with social behavior anxieties. And so if the parents are not involved, it's even more difficult for them. And so that was one big thing I did up front. And then as a result of doing that, we also started making, so he had a lot of occupational therapy problems, so basically sensory issues. And so working with dough, so whether it's Play-Doh or whether it's kneading dough for pizza or anything like that, is very helps from a sensory perspective. And so one day, we were doing a lot of this Play-Doh stuff and throwing the Play-Doh out, and we thought, well, how about if we make something that we can eat? And one of the things that I was really trying to get into him was something that was very calorie dense, because he wasn't eating a lot of different things. And so we started working with dates. Dates happen to be extremely calorie dense, and we just started adding in seeds and chia seeds and sunflower seeds and all these kinds of different things that he was kind of excited about. It was basically like Play-Doh. Okay, and then we were starting to knead it and make it into its dough, and then we took cookie cutters and cut it up into shapes. And that was basically the genesis of Amrita bars, right? And then there was a farmer's market down the street from us. We knew that he needed social behavior therapy, where he had a hard time talking to people and he needed to make eye contact. So I dragged him to the farmer's market, and I was like basically forced him to talk to people. And it just so happened that Whole Foods buyer came by and kind of loved the interaction of him telling the story of the bars, and asked me like, oh, would you like to bring your product to the Whole Foods down the street? And that was it. And that happened in 2011, I think. And I had no idea what retail was. I had no idea what manufacturing. So I scurried down to the basement, and we get some Cuisinarts and some things together, and we started making the product. And for the first year, we made it in our basement, shipped it over to Whole Foods, and it sold really well. And in 2012, IBM was going through a massive layoff. So I raised my hand right away as soon as I found out about it, because I wanted to get out, and this was like an easy way, like they were going to pay me to leave. And so that was basically the way I left, and I started doing Amrita full time.
So that moment when Whole Foods says, hey, do you want to be in Whole Foods? Was it one of those moments where you said yes, and in the back of your head going, how are we ever going to do this?
Yeah. So basically I said yes, and then I ran home and basically started researching, like, how do you put food on Whole Food shelves, like food safety, how do you make products at scale? Because honestly, we just made enough for the farmer's market. Like we were, making a couple $100 a weekend at the farmer's market. Ordered packaging. I still remember, going on my PowerPoint and making, stickers for the bars. We handmade stuff for the first year, pretty much everything.
Wow. And what does Amrita mean? Where did the name come from?
Yeah, it's a Sanskrit word. It means nectar. And because we were making everything sweet, I really believe that, food is joy, it's sweetness, it's, all of that. So that's what Amrita means.
I love it. So then in 2016, this guy over here comes into your life. And was BJ one of your first full-time employees that you hired?
Yeah. So, it's like when you run a small business, you can't afford people like anybody good. And I still remember courting Beach for a while, and he was like, anyway, it wasn't that he was expensive. He was just normal. But as a small business owner, I was like, holy shit. So, and then he wanted to make the transition. So it was great. It was like perfect timing. I think you guys were also trying to figure out what you were going to do with your next steps. So I got a lot of inspiration out of then learning your journey, because I followed a similar journey, I think 2 years later, when I went to London for a whole year.
Yes, and I want to talk about that. And I just love this connection that you and BJ had, because from BJ's standpoint, it allowed us to move into a space of risk, because he was, cutting his salary in half.
Yep.
But he wasn't that great of an employee, because he didn't stay with you very long. I remember it was such an amazing transition. Yeah, and I don't want to tell this story, BJ. So, but I do want to point out that BJ wasn't a great employee because he wasn't there that long, Arshad.
That's not true, but because most of the time, people will say, "Oh, I got to leave because I got a better offer or something." When Beach came to me, he's like, "I'm leaving because I'm figuring out my life, and this is what I want to do." I was like, "Holy shit, that's awesome! I want to do that too, but I can't do that." So definitely keep me in the loop what you're doing. It was awesome.
That was a challenging call to make to you, because it was such a short time, and I was in such an uncertain space, and you had gifted me the opportunity to leave a job, Arshad, that I could have stayed at for the rest of my life. Like I could have been in the corporate world, just like you probably could have been in the corporate world forever. But you gifted me that opportunity, and I'll recall this because I share this story with people who are on the same path. Is, I got that email one day, a promotional email from Amrita about their bars, and I took the hit. I had this hit to email you, or whoever the owner was of Amrita. And I sent the email, and I'm like, if you're ever looking for web help, let me know. And I can't remember how quickly the response was.
It was quick.
But you replied and was like, yeah, let's talk about it. And that gave me permission. It really just unlocked the door to give me permission that it's okay not to stay in the same job or the comfort zone or that square box of safety for the rest of your life. Like you can step outside, and there's other things out there. And so you gifted me that opportunity. And yeah, the discussions about the financial piece were interesting on my side too, because, I'm working with Jess on this discussion. Like, I just want to go and work for something that I loved, some one product, like a product, not, 9 restaurants and an inn and things that I have done in my life, all through my life. And that was plant-based, which was really starting to come up really strong. Like posting pictures of prime rib and seafood was not aligning. But a plant-based nutrition bar for an athlete, or someone who wants to just fuel their body with something clean and nutritious and minimal ingredients, wow, sign me up. And yeah, so I just wanted to express how important that decision was. And then to have that phone call with you again, it's my growth process in working with the uncomfortable situations of now I was with you for 4 months, I want to say. And then we were selling our house and everything in it and hitting the road. And the first thing you did was how can I support you? And I remember we're taking these bars with us on the road and handing them out in Lake Placid at all the little mini tries and getting the word out. So it was never about oh, you owe me, this is something, you committed to. It was more like embracing the opportunities on both sides. How can we help each other grow?
Talking about this relationship that you and BJ had, and it was really fun to watch because I know it was, a big moment for Beej of growth and really getting out of his comfort zone. But also something that was happening was you two were developing this relationship that I've seen over the last 4 years. That was 2016. The last 4 years has really, you guys have just supported each other. I've heard you on calls together. And what I'd love to dive into is what you had touched upon it before about how you packed up and you went to London and how that was partially kind of inspired by the crazy feat that we did. So when did this come into effect?
Yeah, I'll start with when I started Amrita. It was in 2012, and I just followed the traditional path that most food companies do, which is go into retail and start building out retail. Like I was telling you before, I had no idea about food. I just kind of got into this because that Whole Foods buyer came by the farmers market and pulled my product in, and then the ego set in and said, "Oh my God, you're on Whole Foods, so you need to sell, right?" And so I didn't really know anything about the food industry before I got in, and I didn't do enough research to know what is it that I wanted to do. I was just following the path that everybody else was doing, which is basically get into as many stores as you can, outsource the production to somebody else, like do marketing, do sales. And then I was growing really fast. The brand was doing well, but I was making no money. And about 4 years in, I'd burned a ton of my personal money into building the business up. And there was obviously a ton of ego tied into that process because we were a big brand at that time, but really struggling with making money. And about I think 3.5 years in, my wife finally sat me down and said, you're doing something that you love, but you're absolutely just a mess at this. You obviously you're struggling with it from the perspective of feeling good about what you're doing. And it just came down to I realized that most food companies are in this state where they're making no money. They're either burning investor money, or they're hoping that they'll get an exit at some time by somebody. And so at that point, the direct-to-consumer channel was coming up. Shopify was coming up. And I remember having this discussion with you, B, and that's actually when we got you on board, is to help with building the website, because we didn't really have a website at that time, or a good one. And so going into the direct-to-consumer channel, going onto Amazon was the right move. But right around that same time, my wife had this opportunity to be in London for a year. And I was so burnt out by my current state that I said, okay, I'm going to take a year sabbatical. I'm going to put the company on 100% remote, and I'm going to see what comes out of it. I had no idea how this was all going to work out. And I didn't want to give up the company because I felt like I could leave it on autopilot for a year and I could still manage it. And that's what I did. And it was probably the best experience I've ever had. The business actually did not go down. It was flat, which was absolutely the most amazing thing. I had one employee in the US, and I just came back 2 times in the 1 year to run production. And basically, I did everything else from Europe. And I think I traveled 10 countries. We did at least 8 or 9 week-long trips with the kids. And that really taught me this power of like focused work, taking time to do extraordinary things outside of work. And the bottom will not fall out if you just sort of have faith in it.
Oh, faith is everything. Faith is everything. And that's what we're learning on a global scale right now. For those
Yep.
for those that are biting on the bait,
Yep.
we're learning higher levels of faith and trust.
Did you have moments though? Do you recall moments when you were out with your family maybe and you were thinking about business, or you were with business and you were thinking about your family? And if you did, how did you pull back?
Yeah, 100%. And I deal with this now constantly. Like, so I'm terrible at shutting my mind off from work. Like, and it's something that I'm working on constantly. So when I was in Europe, one of the really nice things was just the time difference. So the mornings, nobody was awake in the US. So I really got special time in the morning. So I walked my kids to school. I got my workout in. Till about noon is when I started my work. So I basically worked into the night. And I think that gave me a little bit of separation. But when I was traveling, I just didn't have a strong enough team pre-built in the US to hand off stuff to. So I was still checking emails and things like that. So I was able to do it, and I wish I had just planned it a little bit better so I could enjoy myself a little bit more.
What did you learn in the way of what would you do differently? What did you learn from it?
I would have brought on somebody full time to manage the business. Yep. And I would have basically planned the work with them better, where I was checking in maybe once every week, not every single day, and really just absorbing myself in the culture that I was in. So, and London has a tremendous amount to offer, and I just really wish, like, I've always wanted to work in a cafe, right? I want to be a barista, and I really had that opportunity in London. There were so many cafes, and I just could not get myself to take the time to do that, and that was one regret.
I feel like this is kind of a thing where there was a little bit of like one foot in and one foot
Yes,
out
100%.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like, okay, you know what? It's enough that I'm doing this.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to London when the business is actually not, it's not really producing that much. I'm already taking a big enough risk. Like I've got to be, smart in business. And what happened was you kind of put a cap on your joy.
100%.
And I'll tell you, like I remember this. We were walking to the end of the street, and I said to BJ, BJ, there is a window that's opened. If we don't go through it, it is going to slam shut, and we're not going to get it again. Like we got it, and that's when we were like, no plan B. And he quit a job that he was working for Xterra Wetsuits, which was like paying the rent and paying for groceries. It was the scariest thing we ever did. We got our butts kicked financially, but we're fine. Like we're here, right? We're surviving. And, it took us we went into some debt and things like that, but we stayed in gratitude and we stayed in that belief. And that is a really scary thing to do, is to say, okay, universe, there's no plan B. Like I'm going all in, I'm going to invest in this full-time employee. Yeah. So let's just play a little fantasy here. If you did hire that person and, did like the no plan B, or kind of take your fingers out, to a greater extent, what do you envision your time in London looking like? Do you think maybe you would have gotten that barista job?
100%. Right. So Europe really loves food. And I think that there's no better place than being in London, like walking around to all the cafes and the bakeries, and just like, I was just loving that. And I wish I spent 6 months being a barista, like actually like learning how to make every single coffee drink possible. And then 6 months working in a Swedish cafe or something, like learning things that I would just never find in the US. That's what I would have loved to do. Like basically be an intern in 2 or 3 different companies. And yes, probably I would have lost a lot of money because I would pay somebody else to run the business and all that. But honestly, that's my biggest regret, right? And so I learned from that lesson really hard, and that's actually why I started doing the production here, is because I realized that I always wanted to be a maker. Like I want to physically make a product. I don't want to hand it off to somebody else to do it. And so I took the plunge, right? Most people would say during these times, be lean, outsource, let somebody else handle the risk, versus having all the risk. And I feel like if you love doing what you're doing, it'll work itself out.
I love it. So you use that experience as a way. What I was going to ask you is, like, did it strengthen your desire to get your hands dirty? Right. And it sounds like not only did it strengthen your desire, but it took you to where you are now, which is renting this large space where you're bringing production in-house.
100%.
Yeah, but who are they? This is what I always say. Like, who are they to say? And it's just their experience. They don't know Arshad in his particular. You're creating your future in this very instance, and there's no future proof of exactly what path you're going to take. There's similar situations of people, and that's what we tend to focus on because it gives us certainty, right? To gives us that comfortability to move forward, knowing something. But it doesn't have a pulse. It doesn't have a pulse of your heart, of what you just said, like your desire, like. You learned something in London, you came back here and you went for it. And this is the very thing we talk about. You're present and aware of the things and opportunities that you missed, and you learn from them. And the next time that opportunity shows itself, you do not delay. You act 100%. On it. Even if all the people, are saying, don't do it. This isn't a good time. They just don't know who you are. Does that strengthen your confidence and ability to pretty much do whatever your heart desires?
Yeah, and I think there's also another saying, and there's data that proves this, that when you meet somebody who's at their deathbed, most of the time it's about what they didn't do, right? It's the regret that they talk about the most, right? And so when I experienced this thing in London, I said I don't want to ever have regret again, like especially for big things. I want to just do it. And I'm lucky enough that I've had amazing experiences in my life, right? I've had great degrees. Just I'm lucky, I mean, I came out of India, came to this country when I was 18 with 2 suitcases, $1,000 in my pocket, and I've been able to do it, right? And so a big part of that is luck, a big part of that is hard work, but I think a lot of that is also just got to do with you taking the chances on things that you love doing and just going for it. And so I figured, hey, let's just keep doing that. Going to work out fine.
So somebody who's listening to this, we talk about this a lot, about finding what you love and doing more of it. Because I don't think we're here to go through the motions, and I certainly don't think we're here to be miserable. I believe wholeheartedly and in my bones and my cells that we are here to experience joy at high, high levels. How does someone begin to figure out what they love?
The way I did this was constantly wrote it in a journal or even just reflected on what is it that makes me happy. Because I think most of the time there's enough things that upset us, that make us sad, that make us unhappy with the situation. And some of this we can't change right away. It's just the flow of life. But there are things that, like for me, going out on a long bike ride makes me happy, right? So I know I need to do more of that, right? So that's one of those things. But also working with my hands, like actually seeing 10 ingredients come together in a product, and that product making somebody happy or not happy, but at least giving me feedback is important to me. And so when I was at IBM, I was working on these big, massive hardware projects where nobody gave me any feedback. Like I presented this $1 million proposal to the government. They agreed on it, they didn't agree on it, they signed it, but there was no happiness transaction happening there.
Happiness transaction, that's good, yeah.
Right, I just left the process going, well, great. I did well. I wrote a nice report for my boss, and maybe I got a raise, but internally I didn't feel happy. And I think it's really important for us all to do work that leaves us content and that makes the world a better place. So I think the makes the world a better place is also a really important component of what I want to do. I mean, I could certainly be an entrepreneur and making goods or things that don't leave the world a better place or don't contribute. And so that's why I'm focused on food, plant-based, hiring people with developmental disability here, like just being socially responsible as a business. And I think these are things that we just have to do. At least I have to do as I make a product, because I feel like it's the right thing to do.
You describe your company as having a triple bottom line. What does that mean?
So it's people, it's profit, and it's the planet. Those are the three things that we care about. Obviously, people, meaning we want to hire people, what we call inclusion. So people who are not being given work opportunities generally. So people with developmental disability have very high rates of unemployment, especially right now. So we work with organizations that bring in young adults, so typically 18 to 24-year-olds who have graduated high school, so they don't have all the support of high school. The colleges are not giving them the support, and they're still not getting jobs. And so they bring them here, we give them vocational training, and then our goal is to actually start hiring some of these people to do some of the work here. So that's people. And we also hire refugees. So we work with the Refugee Council of America to bring some of those people in. Typically people who are having a hard time getting jobs in America is people who we want to give an opportunity to. Then the planet. So everything we do has to have some kind of a positive impact to the planet. So plant-based being one of them, recycling paper. We're working with energy, like an electric supplier who's bringing in stuff from solar and wind powered sources. And so just kind of caring about the environment as we go through our daily production process. And then profit is important to us, but giving some of the profit back is more important to us. So we donate 10% of our profits to causes, and we've been doing that for years, but our goal is to be a little bit more aggressive with that now.
That's amazing. That's an abundant mindset, right? Where everybody wins, where we begin to move in a way through our life that is for the benefit of all beings.
Right.
And when the ego looks at that mindset, it says, no, because the benefit of all beings leaves me out. But that's completely false, because the benefit of all beings includes us.
Absolutely. Yep. And I mean, I think the thing that we all have to realize is that we live in a country where the opportunity is immense. Like for any, if you are smart and you put yourself to good work, there's enough business opportunity for most smart people. So then it's a question of, if there's enough opportunity, why would you not give back some of that, right? Why would you just keep it to yourself? And most people who give back realize that it makes them feel better as a result of giving back versus keeping it to themselves. So it's just a design that just makes 100% sense. Not, and even if I think about it selfishly, like just to make myself feel more content, it'll make sense for me to give back. So
Yeah.
Yeah, it just makes sense. I think in the realm of not doing it, it's the fear factor. It's having fear and doubt that you'll never be in the situation again, that you need to hold on to everything or you're going to lose it. When it's actually the reverse. It's actually that boomerang you put out. Like you throw out the boomerang, it's going to come back. So you put these things out. You just keep flooding. And we worked on this when we were working. Just keep putting stuff out. Build the team. Build products, because at that point you didn't even have the bites. Now you have the bites and the fruit products. Like keep putting stuff out. See what sticks. And you're creating momentum. And you're not pumping the brakes at all.
Right. And I think there is a definite amount of unknown that goes into this process, right? You didn't know who was going to pay your bills. There was this big unknown. And I think I'm going through that unknown now with the business. And you just have to have faith. You just have to put it out there. Just put great work into the process, because it will work out fine. And what's the worst thing that will happen? I might have to eat rice and beans for a few more days. No big deal.
Rice and beans. It is the meal for everyone who's ever taken a risk. Sure. Rice and beans. Thank God for rice and beans. So let's talk a little bit about the product line. So you started with the bars, but now you've got some expansion on the website offering some other things. So tell our listeners what you've got there for them.
Yeah. So when we interviewed people, we realized that people have been eating our bars for a while. The flavors, people get tired of the same flavors over and over again. So we could not make new flavors because we were in this transition. So we started looking at what we call snacking opportunities throughout the day. So what we find is that people are snacking literally from when they wake up to when they go to sleep, but they're snacking with different things, right? So bars can serve a really nice purpose for meal replacement when you're on the go or post-workout or something like that. But so can bites in some instances. But we also got into superfood pantry. And this pantry thing was completely because I was bored one day and I said, I've got all this great dried fruit that I buy to make my bars. Why don't I sell this to people who want to use dried blueberries or dried strawberries to make their own overnight oats? And so we started selling it, and people love it because the quality is really high. So we're doing a lot of that. We're buying really high quality dried fruits and selling it in 1 pound, 2 pound bags as pantry staples. And then we're moving now we're going to start making some seed butters, nut butters. We're going to be moving into kids bars. So it's basically sort of expanding the snacking opportunity throughout the day for whether you're an adult or kids or you're an athlete. There's just so many different instances that snacks can be relevant through the day.
I'm horrified to admit this because BJ certainly knew about it and I didn't, but I actually just got onto the pantry today. Wow. And I was like, what is all of this? And BJ's like, oh yeah, he put that up there. And I was like, oh my gosh, why am I buying our dried cranberries for our granola or our dried blueberries from Amazon? So I ordered some mangoes today and some ginger today and some toasted coconut because the world just needs more toasted coconut and coconut bacon and things like that. But that is an amazing option for people who maybe they're like, well, I don't really want to eat bars. Well, you can go there and you've got all these amazing dried fruits and seeds and delicious things to snack on where we're getting great nutrients and we're supporting a smaller business and not supporting something so huge. Yep. So I love the pantry. I'm glad to hear that it's going well. And so the expansion will be into some seed butters and things like that. What is the grand vision moving forward? Do you have any kind of pie in the sky that you'd be willing to share?
Well, I mean, I love making just different types of snacks. And the one area that I'm still trying to figure out is how to bring global flavors in. So when I was in London, there were lots of European flavors that had never made it to this part of the world. And I really want to bring some of those in. Also, my background growing up in India, I mean, there's amazing superfoods like ginger, turmeric, cardamom as a spice. So there's lots of these things that I just haven't figured out how to make it into perfect snack. So we're working on things like that. Plus, I have really bad dairy intolerance. And so I'm on this quest to figure out how to make different things with coconut milk or, some other non-dairy alternative. And so I've been working on this, chai, that comes with coconut milk and comes with cane sugar already pre-built. If you're traveling, you're not having to pay 50 extra cents to the barista to give you, a little bit of non-dairy milk. It's pre-made. So there are these kinds of things that it's scratching my own itch. That's a lot of what I've been working on. Plus just the snacks that I mentioned to you guys, kid snacks and nut butters and seed butters.
The stuff is good. I can attest to that. I have a question about your son now at 15 years old. And like you said, presenting as neurotypical child. Does he know the story and that he was the catalyst? Does he understand all of that?
He does. And he started understanding a lot about 2 years ago. And because he's heard me talk about it a few times,
Mm-hmm.
and I always felt a little bit odd talking about him around him. It just I kind of felt like a sellout in some ways, like so I'm trying to build this company on my son, and so I sat down with him. I said, this is your story, and incidentally, he doesn't remember all of it, but one of the things that I loved about what he told me was that he wanted to help more kids who were maybe not as fortunate as him, and he was able to identify those kids really well because he still has some of those tendencies of being a little shy and all that. So I think in his future career, I think he's going to probably be working in this space just because he can relate to it really, really well.
Yeah. And how are you involved with the autism community? I know that you do work with the community. What does that look like?
Yeah, so in 3 phases, right? So we work with organizations that bring the young people to our office to pack boxes and basically vocational training. So that's a big part of time and effort that I spend with them because ultimately I want to employ those people here and maybe even some people from that program. The second one is to educate the community about the connection between food and autism, and that one is tough. But I'm really focused on getting as much data out there and as much case studies of other parents like myself having seen success and just putting that out there for people. And then I think the third one is just donating to Autism Speaks, all the different events, product, time, that kind of stuff.
What do you want our audience to take away from your story, sharing your story, the risks that you've taken, the frustrations that you've endured? What do you want them to take away as a message?
Well, I think there's a piece about my journey, and I tell a lot of people about this, is like, it doesn't matter at what stage in your career you're at. I'm 52, and I jumped when I was 45 from IBM, right? And I still feel like I have no retirement in sight at all, right? And I think I'm going to be working for the next 30 years, quite happily working because I love working. So it's really important to, if you're unhappy in what you're doing, to figure it out and to go do it because you don't want to be regretting it on your deathbed. So that's one big component. And I think the other piece is just this connection between food and feeling well. And I think you guys do quite a bit of that, talking about that on your show. Obviously, plant-based is a big part of that, but there's just so many other pieces, right? Sleep, rest, meditation, stress management. I mean, there's just all those components, and there's so much data out there now that wasn't there 10 years ago on how to just live a better life. And so people need to just listen and take action.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned meditation quickly. So because we've talked about this, but what is your what's your current mindfulness practice look like?
Yeah, so I do about 10 minutes when I wake up, right? I find like I just got to get it in, otherwise it's hard. And then I do another 10 minutes before I go to bed. And that one, I find I just started adding it last week, where it was basically I had this gratitude journal that I just wasn't using. And I found like whenever I used it, I felt great. Like I slept really well when I did my gratitude journal. And so that's it. So I do kind of 2 pieces of meditation, right around 10 minutes each. And the nighttime is a little bit longer because I'm writing stuff down.
And isn't it amazing to just wash the day away with that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's 10 minutes.
So
And
little time.
Beej and I have, this whole coronavirus and all of that has really called us to, we know, like, we need to be meditating more. Those who are meditating, we need to be meditating more, okay? We need to be attuning to the light, because this cloud is very dense and it's fed by fear and doubt.
Yeah.
And so it's calling us to more, which I love. Like, okay,
Yeah.
like I'm ready for more. Let's do it. And so we've been adding a second meditation, but not every single night. And when we do it though, it's like, oh my gosh, it's just amazing. But I love it. And it can be 10 minutes. 10 minutes is profound at the end of a day. When you think about what especially with this audience of athletes, like we don't have a lot of time where we're just staring at the wall, unless we just get back from a long workout and we can't move. We're doing a lot. Like this community is doing a lot. And so to take that time to do nothing is profound. And it will have I want to encourage everybody who's listening to this. It is having a profound effect at the rate at which we are moving through the current circumstances of our life.
100%. Yeah. And I'm so glad to see meditation starting to take more of a mainstream stage, because I think it's first of all, it's free. Secondly, it's like, and in this age where everybody's trying to watch their money and all that, it's free, just do it. And everybody's got 10 minutes at least in a day. And a lot of the apps and all the way to do it is also free, enough videos and all that on the internet to learn how to do it.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong way. And 10 minutes is less than 1% of your day. Less than 1% of your day.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing is that people sometimes can't get the quantitative feedback from meditation fast enough, so sometimes they leave. But and I was that way too. Like I was just like, my heart rate's not going down. I have a Fitbit on, and like it's still beating at 70 beats a minute. This thing is not working. But the more you do it, the more you realize that you just feel better. Like overall, you're not as reactive. I'm a very reactive person, especially with 3 young kids and all that. And I think meditation just makes me take a pause, like before I say something back. And
it's that when we talk about doing what we love and taking risk, which if you're going to do what you love, you're going to be taking a risk, even if it's your hobby and you have a full-time job that's paying the bills. If you're doing what you love, you're taking a risk because you're putting yourself out into the world and you're sharing your gifts, right? So that's super scary. And when we meditate and when we get still, when we move into that calmness, we're connecting in with our essence, and our essence is complete and it's whole and it's not sick and it's not scared and it's not lackful. And so if people are looking for fuel to be able to take these risks and do what they love, meditation is going to, as a byproduct of the practice, going to connect ourselves with that part of us that's always ready to take risk, because risk is no big deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. This is amazing. You had a question about our podcast for
Arshad.
Oh,
yeah. Because I know you're an avid listener. Now that I know you've got an hour each way.
2 hours. He commutes
2 hours.
2 hours each way?
No, 1 hour each way.
1 hour each way. So I'm sure you've heard tons of conversations. What can you pinpoint as something you've pulled away from maybe something we've discussed or a podcast guest has maybe brought some or shined some light on for you? Like what's one thing you could take away from what you've listened to?
Yeah, I think a lot of your podcasts, I mean, you have a ton of athletes on your podcast and they talk about, training, and I've been listening to a lot of your 100K, discussions about your racing and all that. And I think the amazing thing that I take away from most of these discussions is that the limit it's limitless, right? And so it's like, doing 100-mile race is crazy for anybody to think about it. And I know you've got a past of training and all that to get there, but still, you're taking some massive chances and just putting it out there in the universe and doing it, right? And I think that's one of the things that I've sort of taken away is just put the goal out there and just work. Just put in the work every single day, just for the sake of putting in the work, right? Like don't count, like don't just, because I have a big habit coming from the background of being in consulting and strategy to count, to just look for data to validate why I'm doing things. And I think one of the things that you guys have taught me, and I've been teaching myself through meditation, is it's okay not to know the answers. It's okay to not have feedback coming in, but just to be able to just put the work in.
Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah,
Wow,
do the work for
yeah.
the sake of the work and not for the fruits. And something that BJ says all the time, because it doesn't matter for me when I signed up for my first 50K, that felt the same as when I signed up for my first 50 mile, and the first 50 mile felt the same as the first 100K. Like, oh, this is big. It's the unknown. And something that BJ says all the time is like, can you just be willing to have an experience? Do the work. Yeah.
It's really difficult, to just leave it up to the joy of the experience, because I think we're all so wired to go, I want to have, what's my time like? I mean, I really struggle with going out on a bike without any instruments. It drives me crazy. But when I do that ride without instruments, I feel great, because there's no data to tell me either way. It's just my feeling at the end of the day. Like, how did my legs feel?
Right. There's no data to say, hey, listen, you shouldn't feel great because you were actually really slow.
Yeah. Or, hey, the data that I use is, how tired did I get? Like how empty is my tank? And, what did I leave out there? And how well did I ride and all that?
I love it. Amazing. What a beautiful conversation. It flew by and we're so grateful. Thank you so much. Any final words, Beach?
Yeah, I just want to thank you again for just the opportunity to take the plunge and afford me that opportunity to be where we are right now, 4 years later, being able to have this conversation with you, which has been in the queue for so long, hoping that we could be face to face. But what's going on right now is gifting us this conversation virtually. So we're just so thankful that you're in our lives, and you've just been an inspiration for me and for everybody out there.
Yeah, and the same way, vice versa, because I think you've been a big inspiration for me to do things that I'm still trying to figure out how to do, like make the move to California at some stage, right? And to pack my car and go away for a while. So, keep doing the amazing thing that you guys do.
Oh, thank you. And if you need anybody to help you throw some stuff out, then I will be there in a jiffy. I love to throw things out.
You know what? I'll make sure that I get you guys all my test products that I'm making, because there'll be a lot of those coming up.
Oh, that
Awesome.
sounds wonderful.
Amazing.
Thank you so much for sharing with us. And I can't wait to launch this into the world.
Thank you. Take care, guys.